Meanwhile, Ashwat is no more. Makbul has gone. Asiya and Nilofer raped and then killed. Afzal hanged. Tufail buried in 2 graves. The Ita seller in Lal Chowk disappeared. They found his bones with empty bottles. The kettle whistles, the tea never comes. Our bones are made tired waiting before the door of law from that overused Kafka day. The only thing that grows after this weight are their swords, proving mightier, and this too we write. They exhort us to write, and write in blood. Of peace, of tulip gardens they grow, on soils made fertile with our flesh and bones, and write when they are at war with us. So, this was the thing that I felt it was very hard. That thing. I would like to call to invite Manecksha. She is an independent journalist who has reported extensively from Kashmir, covering human rights and development issues. She has also worked with the Times of India and the Indian Express and has co-authored several books. One of them is one book that is Behold I Shine, Narratives of Kashmir's Women.
I really don't know how much of what you want there kind of background. There is enough how much do you think that you need to go back to school or are you still making it? How much do you have? See, the thing is this aggregation is very technical and one which you can do. But basically, I think what is important is to understand that there has been a very distinctive geographical and historical perspective which as we have not ever understood properly, which is why you have these issues out not just things we have to exactly like what are there, what is it that phases happened 70 years from now and see I think you can lead up to 70
See, and again, I'm not very good in dates and things, so I may get things wrong. Please double check. So I think very briefly, one of the main things to understand is that this struggle for political aspirations and their own freedom predates our own independence. Okay, so it began in I'm not too sure which was the Punj struggle and the thing before it. So it predates this struggle of our own independence. So they had started demanding freedom from the Dogra rule, which was the Hari Singh's thing, even before we got our own independence. And I think if you read, is it Karan Thapar or someone who has written very well, that we have to, recently there's an article, just check it up, on what exactly happened in Punj and the huge massacre that happened, which sparked off all the concerns. So, very, very briefly, what had happened is, as you know, with the independence struggle is, not struggle, with independence, was that you were carving up basically all these regions in India, and Kashmir unfortunately happens to be on a very delicate front line. So you had a Dogra ruler whose personal equations with Nehru were not good. And you had at that time the first political party of Kashmir, which was Sheikh Abdullah's. And so the Hari Singh was wavering whether he would go this side, whether he would go that, or whether he wanted to be independent. So I think basically there was this confusion. And in this confusion was exacerbated when you had people come in from the Lashkars come in on the basis that they were hearing accounts of a massacre. So these tribesmen came in from the northwest frontier, and that sparked off the real now you had them marching in past Baramulla towards Srinagar, and there was this great fear of Hari Singh's. So I think at that time he panicked. This was in October, I think. He panicked and he sent off a message to Mountbatten and to the Indian state, and that's where the first troops were lifted. Interestingly, that is your beginning of militarization of Kashmir. And again, there is a lot of history which you can check out and find. You had the instrument of accession and what it is. So just read your history. But what is important is these political aspirations are starting from a long time back. And I think geographically, I think anyone who travels will see that there is a Central Asian culture rather than a South Asian culture. So culturally also there is a huge visible difference. And in fact, I remember a friend telling me that she had never been out of her home in the valley, and when she went down to Jammu, she said, I felt alien. So I said, was anyone? She said, no, people were very good to me where I stayed, but I just felt alien. It was a very different. And I think, again, we tend to forget that for them, their history is not turning towards the South Asian. Just as probably for the South India, the experiences of the North would be a different culture in some ways. So I think these are two very important giveaways that we need to keep in mind when we consider why they want this very special identity and why they feel so threatened now. In a way, the abrogation was anyway, the article was hollowed out long ago, they say. But now they see it as a complete demographic change and a kind of threat to their very identity as a person. So now I think this much history should be good enough. I mean, there's so much that one goes into, but for now. So basically, I think I visited in October just now. What I found was that this was a very meticulous, well-planned strategy. It has been taken, it has probably started at least 2-3 years previously. And when I asked people that, and incidentally I began my career of going from 2010. So I asked them, so what is different? There was 2008, there was 2009, there was 2010, there was 2016. So what exactly are you this time that puts so much fear? So I think one of the things is that it was so meticulously planned, and of course, the communication, snapping, the turning everyone virtually into an island. You couldn't communicate. You had more than doubling of the troops. You had suddenly 1 million. When earlier you would have, say, 70. What was the thing earlier? 70 lakhs, 60 lakhs. Now you had 1 million. And you were cut off from each other as well as from the rest of the world and India. And you were absolutely, literally plunged into the unknown. Though they did say that they had, for some days, been a bit alarmed by advisory that you stock up food, that the troops were coming in. So another exercise that I discovered when I went there was this unofficial army survey of door-to-door profiling of a village. So they had conducted this, I think, from 2017 in Bandipora, in Pulwama, all of Srinagar, where they would go from house to house. Each house is painted with a number. So actually in the villages, you don't number streets or doors or houses, but each one has a number now if you go. And in the house, they had taken very detailed accounts of how many youths are there, who is studying outside, who is studying, how many laborers work with them, who comes in. So they have this full knowledge with them. And I think, how many are they going to keep getting? Up. So there were a whole, there was a lot of this information that has been collated. It's in the newspapers, I think if you check Rising Kashmir and others, there is this unofficial, because at every stage people say that no, this is not official census. It was an unofficial census. So I think one of the main, when I went there, one of the main things that people are talking about are the mass arrests. I'm not talking now about the mainstream politicians, I'm talking about in the villages where youths who were seen to be, as anyone seen to be even wanting to protest or talk, was picked up. And this is facilitated by the fact that they know in every house how many boys, who boys, which boys. So I think later you'll talk about the habeas corpus. Yeah, so you should have that. You would have that. But these night raids have been striking huge terror. They are reminiscent of the 90s. This used to happen, like, I think the crackdown, Danish spoke of the crackdown. So this is a little expansion from that. When I had been, they used to talk of the 90s, in which ASPA allows you the right to enter someone's home and to even to blow it up or destruct it, which actually is contrary to the international humanitarian law for conflicts. But one of the things is that Kashmir is not a conflict, or we don't classify it as one. So there is no IHL there, no international humanitarian law prevails, and AFSPA allows you to enter the homes. So very often what is happening in these night raids is that you have the troops coming in and conducting searches and huge mass terror in the middle of the night, in which boys are picked up, and some minors were also arrested. In fact, I think in court 3, 4, 5 at least PSA cases they have dropped because they've been proved to be minors. But there are a lot of illegal detentions. So what happens in these illegal detentions is there is no paperwork, no charges are brought. They are just taken first to the army camp for the first night, then sent to the police thana, and in the police thana they are warned that I think they're also trying 107 under the Preventive Detention Act. This is a piece of legislation in which, if the executive magistrate or the tehsildar believes that you are going to pose a problem, he has the right to detain you and you produce a bond. Now here what they are doing is they are not allowing the bond thing to be produced. So you remain in limbo, and then you are finally released, but you come out unless you give a few names. So they are pressurizing them to give a few more names. So it's a kind of cyclical detention. So today 5 of you here maybe will be picked up, 5 of you tomorrow, another 5 for a week. So the idea is that the whole village gets this fear psychosis. And the worst thing is that since your phone is not there, you cannot communicate, you cannot get through to your lawyer. Your lawyer himself is incommunicado. Half of his legal fraternity has also been picked up. And during these raids is where we have come across instances of torture. They have been well documented. You can open up NYT or Guardian or any, I think they're really well. You see, how do I put it? There's a kind of complete terror being unleashed in the night. In Srinagar, some of the people told me that there was a woman from the CRPF called Durga who had blown up the transformers in the neighborhood so that they don't have electricity and they are plunged in darkness. In some instances, they come in and they threaten to unleash the pellet guns, that unless you come out of the house, we are targeting you with pellet guns. And women have their clothes torn off. In fact, in one of the, which I'll be writing about, one of the most horrible instances in which there are these multiple kind of abuses taking place, picking up a minor boy. But the old man was most upset that his wife, who had not even worn her shalwar, was sleeping, and an old woman who is clearly not mentally very stable was also dragged out of the room. And in sheer fright, one grandson had climbed up a tree, and then he was brought down. And when I last heard, they were still being detained. In some instances, not verified, but I think authentic. See, one of the other things is that I think if you read the torture report, you'll understand also that one of the things is the utter humiliation. So when they are arrested, I don't know whether it's prevalent elsewhere, but they strip you. the boys are completely stripped. And in this instant, they were not minors, they were majors, but they were pushed into a room stripped and with dogs there. So all this is not just a fear psychosis, but also to keep humiliating you and to keep on how should I say, what is the correct word to say it, at every stage to demean you as a human being. So, to put you in your place, to kind of try to. And these are just some of the instances that are coming to my mind of my field trip. Of course, for others also, a complete lack of access to hospitals, to where you want to travel, and it's all very arbitrary. So today, the wire is rolled back. See, the wire goes like this. You roll it back, and then you can roll it thing to stop. So today he'll allow you, tomorrow he may not. So that kind of restrictions on even your movement and whom you visit, how you visit, access to daily necessities. I think that much you must have heard of. So I just basically wanted to bring in the horror of the night raids because this is the crux of the thing, and the illegal detentions and torture. I'll stop here for the time being. I think maybe one can pick up, but this is at the moment. See, the difference of, so sorry, I missed this bit. 2008, 2009, 2010, 2016 were all a question of something happened, there was a reaction, and the state fought back. But basically, in 2016, they had planned this very, very well. So this time it was preempting. Before you can do anything, they preempt. Like what's happened today. Here, you preempt any kind of action. So that's the kind of preempting of any action. And it's been very well executed. I think it's a very Israeli style strategy worked out. So right now, I think maybe you can pick up.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Geeta Seshu. She's an independent.
Actually, we just decided. Can I go next?
Yeah.
Veena wants to take off
And
from.
I'm just a lawyer.
Come. Can I?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just have a bad knee. So I guess one couldn't work with sitting like all of you are. Anyway, my name is Veena Gowda. I'm an advocate. And so as I was saying, I'm a feminist lawyer. Unlike Freny, my engagement with the issue of Kashmir has not been very long. So we were about 11 of us who went to Kashmir from 28th to about September to about 5th of October. And a lot of us were lawyers in that group. And we had activists, we had researchers, as well as a psychiatrist, so who was able to give the mental health perspective. But I think Brinelle is covering that bit. But I think just taking off, and why we just decided to change the flow of it was because just to take off from what Freny was telling us. I think somewhere the reason at least why I went, because this was not an issue that one I had engaged with. I'm often working on violence against women, etc. That's my area of work. But I think one wanted to actually, because we wanted to also look at access to justice and to see what really is happening. Because as lawyers, we're constantly trained. I mean, we've studied for 5 years of law, practiced for so many years. Somewhere most of our hope and everything, is so pinned on the courts. So one wants to see that what is happening and what is this that we all talk about as rule of law, and where is that, how is that rule of law functioning? And how are we functioning as a constitutional democracy, and what does that mean? And I think somewhere, as I said, many of us were working on, or all of us on the team were working on what is called access to justice. But I think it was when we went into Srinagar that one discovered that justice is a distant dream. Somewhere there seemed to be no access to law itself, and there was no access to courts itself. So one of the first things, like Freny was saying, I think what they did, I mean, we know that the constitutional amendment was passed on 5th of August. And so just before that, what happened was that many of the political leaders were detained, arrested, etc. And in addition to that, actually, if you see, many of the lawyers were also detained and arrested. The president of the Bar Association in Srinagar was arrested. Some of the presidents in Baramulla, etc., were also arrested. The were detained, and the ex president of the Bar Association in Srinagar was also detained. So therefore, there was a sudden whatever, where people were picked up. There was communication blockade, and then people wake up to the fact that 370 has been abrogated. We're not even a state, we're a union territory. So I think that somewhere there is a sense from when we went of being let down and there being what they call a constitutional fraud being committed on them. So now all of us know that in Kashmir you have the Public Safety Act. So we have under our constitution Article 22, which says that no person shall be detained without being produced before the court within 24 hours, etc. Now certain exceptions are made to this fundamental right article, and under the AFSPA, the Public Security Act, etc., and certain amendments, some 35C, etc., which was subsequently removed. So therefore, what happens is, you can be detained. You can be detained without actually being produced before a magistrate. So what we saw was, yes, so this is what has happened, and we went, and we also have heard that many people, when people were detained, actually went and filed what is called a habeas corpus petition, which is also what the High Court has, what is called a writ jurisdiction, where they are allowed to pass certain orders which don't come necessarily under your statutory provisions, etc. And habeas corpus is one of the most fundamental writs, which is literally to say produce the body of the person that we can't find. I mean, we use it all over the country. In Kashmir, they had a High Court rules which said that habeas corpus petition should be decided within 15 days. However, what we've heard and what we've seen till today, that even today, I think in a couple of days, it will be 100 days, that the habeas corpus petitions have actually not been heard. So petitions are filed. So now when petitions are filed, any proceedings, you have to serve the other side. A summons has to be served. So how do you serve the summons? So normally there's a lawyer there from the government side or whatever, and they'll have an office there and ask them to take it, accept it, whatever. But it is said that in Kashmir, they said that no, you have to serve it on the department. You can't serve it in court, etc. So which meant serve it on, for us, when I started my practice, we used to have something called, the High Court used to give printout boards. At 8:30 you would go check it out and see whether your matter is there or not there. And that was about more than 20 years ago. And so now everything is on our phone. Boards come on our phone. Which matter is going on currently is also known on our board display, etc., etc. And you can send someone by email, by courier, by whatever. So you have various ways. So to actually walk in there and say that service of summons is so difficult, because what does communication blockade in that sense mean? That there is no email, there is no phone, there is no transport where you can, then how do you serve these summons? So that is the first step. But at the same time, court has extraordinary jurisdiction. We've seen extraordinary jurisdictions being exercised by higher courts, but somehow that has been failed to have been done here. So matters are still pending for service of summons. Then once the summons is served, then the reply, the state will take time. The lawyer is not there, etc., etc. So therefore, so that's why I think one said that forget access to justice, there's no, in that sense, access to courts itself. And when you go to various, and so therefore, because all these people were arrested, the lawyers have gone on a hartal. So there's a strike of lawyers. None of them are appearing in court. However, in each court, when you go, for example, in the High Court or the district court, they have a set of number of lawyers who will appear in these matters which are urgent, because it's a question of people's right to movement, etc., etc. So therefore, they will. You need to approach the court. Then the court will say, "You didn't come to us, so what could we have done?" So there is a set of committee of about 6 or 7 lawyers who appear. But then, as we've seen, there have been no orders passed. I mean, so that hasn't been fruitful at all. And like she was saying, there are these barbed wires all over the city, which is also there in a lot of these district courts, etc. So to walk into the courts is also a bit of a maze. And you go there, litigants can't come to court. So there's actually nothing really happening much in court. While the judges are sitting, lawyers are not appearing, litigants can't come to court, and are not coming to court. And whenever a report is asked for, etc., how do you show disposal? I mean, in a court you have to show disposal. How many cases did you decide today? So what we heard and what the lawyers told us was that they're increasing traffic challans. And then they force you to come to court so that they can show that you can show the figures on the thing, and the police are going to people's homes and saying come and appear in court, etc. So now there is no possibility of going to court because there's no transportation, there is no form of communication. You can't communicate with lawyers, etc. So there we come to that thing of justice being a far dream, and accessing the court itself is so difficult. In addition to that, there's no access to law in certain situations. For example, what she was talking about night raids. What we heard and what we saw were that very many people were actually picked up. So when you're picked up, what happens is that then you can go to court and apply for bail, apply for things. So therefore, but when you have to apply for bail, you need certain documentations. I mean, even if you go to court, if they will tell you that, okay, tell us the FIR number, etc., etc. But here, people are picked up and there is no documentation. So when there is no documentation, there is no access to law. I can't go and file whatever. So people are picked up and are kept in custody. They're taken to what are the interrogation camps, interrogation centers, etc. There is a lot of brutality. We've seen young minors being picked up actually. We met a couple of minors. And where this boy was telling us that he was not the only one, there were several other minors in the lockup when he was kept there, that they had beaten them, they were not given cooked food, the food was very raw, the toilet was not usable, there was no light, they were given candle for a few hours, etc. And therefore, there was a lot of violence when they were picked up. And so when they were picked up, and so the parents would not even know where the men or the younger boys were. Now, under the law, I mean, since the amendment of the Juvenile Justice Act, you can't pick up these minors, and there's a certain procedure under certain circumstances. So therefore, when these men and juveniles were picked up, the families would not even know where they were. How do you find out? You literally go from one police station to the other police station. So there would be a couple of days when they would actually not know where they were. Finally, the police would tell them. Now, there's a concept also called open FIRs, which is there in Kashmir. So there's an incident that takes place, you file an FIR and it is just kept open, which is because with no specific names of the accused, etc. in it. So if someone is picked up and then they will, so if I try to go to move to court, etc., what they will do is they will just add your name into this open FIRs. So then even if you try to do something, then they'll apply Public Safety Act, etc. against you. So therefore, a lot of times people would say it's okay, we don't want any recourse to law because that would mean further harassment to us. So then just let it be. We will wait for them to come out. So for them to be released, etc., again there's a lot of corruption there too. They would be asked for money,
some of them asked for 20,000 rupees, 30,000 rupees, where people had to literally sell their belongings to get their boys out. But just because they got them out doesn't mean that they will not be picked up again. So it's this whole vicious cycle. In addition to that, there was something evolved called community bond, okay, which actually there is no concept of that in our legal system, where you ask certain representatives of that community to come and give an undertaking, or the family to give an undertaking, saying that they will be responsible if we are going to release this boy. They will be responsible if something happens tomorrow. So therefore, like she was saying, kind of creating a collective punishment form and a collective sense of fear. So so there was this one parents that we met, where they said they were new to the to the locality, so they did not have anybody who could stand for them. So they had to go and call the Maulvi or whatever of the locality and say, please will you come. So that the Maulvi who was giving an undertaking and the auto driver who was come with them as a witness to sign that. So these are the legal hurdles that are also created. So that's what I mean by saying, yes, there is no access to law also, and that it becomes extremely difficult. In addition, to that, I think Geeta and she's already spoken about the massive militarization, etc. Let me just see if I've covered. And we also have something called 107 under the procedure code, which is preventive detention, that you can pick up people, etc. But there is a procedure that has to be followed, which is not followed, as I said here, that there is no documentation at all. And what is also very interesting is that we also visited the Juvenile Justice Board. We visited the State Human Rights Commission, where Justice Bilal Maski was the chairperson, etc. Now, all these buildings exist. There's a structure, there is a system that is there, but nothing is functional, and nothing is really accessible to people. So if you were to see and ask, saying that yes, the judges are sitting, the commission is sitting, but we haven't really got any number of cases, which I think when the Supreme Court asked for the High Court to give a report on the number of juvenile, etc., arrested, I think they said there was not many, but we ourselves have seen that many juveniles have been detained. And another interesting thing that they have done is also that when you have detainees, when you're picked up, like I said, it's very difficult for them to find out, first of all, that where you are. Now, not only are they detained, but they're being transferred outside of the state. So many of them are transferred to Agra, etc., where so they're not even informed. The family is not even informed as to where they are. So they are unable to access the people, to meet them. Literally, for example, when I was talking to you about the habeas corpus is the court asking the executive, in that sense, and holding them accountable to where the people are. So it is the court saying that you produce them. I want to see that they are okay as per under Article 21, 22, whatever. But here, actually, the courts, in a sense, have only literally made it a mulakat petition, where orders that are given are literally only to say that you can meet somebody, and not really have acted on these. So people who are also transferred outside of the court, where we met a couple of people where their family members had also been transferred outside, and there is no, she will talk to you about the other the civil hartal that's going on in the state, but there is no money for them to go outside of the state to find where the people are, etc., and to actually
access the law or justice. Actually, I think two of our colleagues, when we went to the district courts and when we also went to what is called the Tata court and the UAPA court. Now there is only one which is in Srinagar. So which means anyone that is arrested under that, the people will have to come from all over the state to there, and how will they come? So I think somewhere, I mean, of course today our venue was cancelled and we're sitting in a park, but even this park is a very comfortable space. I think for us to even imagine and visualize what it means. I mean, for me as a lawyer, sometimes I would sit in Bombay and say, oh, the judge is absent, the other side didn't come, and I saw my matters being adjourned for a month or 2 months, and that gets so frustrated, and you say, you can't do this anymore. But to actually, as a lawyer, see that the system, in that sense, at least the legal system, has completely failed in a way, and how do you deal with it? So when we went there, we were actually, what was very interesting to see is we are seeing that there is no communication and no one had mobile phones. But we did see that certain people's mobile phones worked. We didn't realize, because we were wondering, we said, how can that be? Because we thought network gone means everybody's network is gone. That was the first time that we actually realized there can be selective, opening of phones. So I don't know, because some of us were even wondering, was it that they were operating on Wi-Fi and maybe like a WhatsApp call or something. But we did. Two of my teammates were accosted by the public prosecutors in the court, and they asked them, saying, "What are you doing here? Why are you here? I mean, you need to take permission. You can't just come like this. Don't get involved in all of this, etc." So there was this that threat that was there, and he said, "Okay, if you want something, then you ask me, and I will give you my number." And the number he gave was a mobile number. So then our colleague asked him, "But how come your phone is working?" So he said, "I'm a public prosecutor." Yeah, so certain people, so it's not in that sense that everybody's phones were not working. So in that, I'll finally, I think even the State Human Rights Commission, when colleagues of ours met Justice Nazgi, I think the situation was that on 31st October, it was becoming from a state to a union territory. So the Human Rights Commission was also not aware as to what their own status would be post 31st October, and that they were also not getting complaints, etc. So therefore, I think generally, people were also scared was of reprisals. That even lawyers in that sense were worried that that if they took up anything or they did something, there would be a PSA, etc. applied on them. And just to kind of conclude, but the general sense, I think, of the people of Kashmir was that our voices are never heard, and our voices were not heard, and the will of the people, like I think Danish was also talking about, that what is the will of the people? I mean, what is it that, because I think many of us, when you go out and speak to people in our own families, etc., the question they will ask you is, how else could it have been done? The way the government did it, that's the only way you could have done it. How else could you have done it? Otherwise, the situation constantly continues. But can process, the procedure that is involved, can it completely override what our constitution and what as a constitutional democracy that we stand for? And so I think we have put in certain recommendations, I think, in our report, based on our what we had seen. And I think one of the things was to say that recognize that dispute exists between peoples of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, and the Indian government. Repeal the Public Safety Act as well as the AFSPA. Withdraw all armed forces and open a transparent, unconditional dialogue with the peoples of Jammu and Kashmir and their representatives, and address their aspirations to determine and define their own
own destinies through democratic means, to find political solution that respects the democratic will of the people in accordance with the human rights and international law. So I think somewhere what one has, like someone actually told us there, that I don't think they really care about the Kashmiris. It's the land that they want. It's like they don't really want Nagas. They just want the Naga land. So that so that being the sentiment, I think that one needs to then see and figure how one can proceed with this, keeping in mind what the will of the Kashmiris is. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Brinelle. Okay, and I was part of a 4-member team that went to Kashmir between 25th and 30th of September. Okay, so it was Shabnam Hashmi, who's a well-known social activist. Many of you may have heard about her. Anirudh Kala, who is a psychiatrist, and in fact had strongly critiqued certain articles in the Lancet. You can go back and have a look at that on the Kashmir issue. Revati Lal, who was formerly with the NDTV and is an independent journalist, and myself, I'm an academic and an activist. So I do teach in a university in Bombay, but of course I went in my personal capacity, taking privilege leave and informing my center colleagues and the dean that I was going to Kashmir in my individual capacity. And what propelled me to go was the fact that, of course, it's the issue of Kashmir, and I wanted to be there and express my solidarity and be part of this fact-finding mission. But it was the Kashmir issue, the NRC, Ayodhya, mob lynching is also about what I believe to be the idea of India, and about human rights, okay, about constitutional morality, and therefore, I wanted to very actively engage with these issues because I feel that the personal is political. Okay, so it involved a lot of risk coming from, being a faculty member of a university in Bombay, but I was willing to take the risk. Now, one of the important things, like I will not focus on the other issues which have already been dealt with. I want to talk about the civil disobedience part because that is something that absolutely, struck us when we went there. And the Kashmir conflict has always been looked at from the narrative of violence and militancy. But what you're seeing right now, okay, barring a few incidents, and if they didn't happen, I would be terribly surprised. Okay, what you've heard recently, because it has a long history of conflict, and obviously, violent conflict has also been part of this overall struggle. But what we were really, really struck by was the entire civil disobedience that was taking place without any leadership. Okay, everybody, as they have rightly told you, is in every political leader, every social activist, not only political leaders, but even social activists or any this thing are under detention or, either under house arrest or, in jails either in Kashmir or elsewhere. So I will just read out certain parts of the report, but I want to communicate to you what the people told us. I don't want this to be my analysis. I mean, you read adequately, so I would rather go by the quotes. 2 months was a long time for people to be under siege. And there was a lot that was very substantial and worthy written on what was going on in Kashmir after the abrogation of Article 370A and 370 and 35A of the Indian Constitution. After extensive travels in the valley between September 25th to 30th and talking to more than 350 people, we did find ourselves looking at the big picture differently from those that had gone in and written reports so far. The Indian government had spun and still continues to spin that the story that they clamped down on civil liberties in Kashmir with an increased military presence, summary arrest of all mainstream and separatist leaders, and the communication blockade has brought peace to the valley. But we found exactly the opposite. Kashmir is on edge, humiliated, angry, disturbed, and disrobed, as a journalist who spoke to us described it. The fact that there has been no violence or very limited violence has to do with the resilience of the people. It's an active and collective choice being exercised each day to observe a civil disobedience. In feeling rejected and betrayed by the Indian state, Kashmiris have chosen to respond back through a largely non-violent protest. Most people we met told us that they were keeping their shops and offices closed, not under any call by militants or separatists or political leaders, but as an act of resistance against the Indian state. And there were a couple of reasons mentioned for the same. Firstly, it points to an internalizing of the trauma caused after the abrogation of 370 in a radically new way from the previous instances of state versus people. In 2016, when there were large-scale protests after the killing of Hizbul Mujahideen commander Burhan Wani, people were led into those protests by separatist leader Said Ali Shah Gilani. This time there is no leader, no call to protest from anyone. So the decision to keep shops and businesses shut is one that individuals have taken across Kashmir largely on their own. Secondly, this mode of protest sets these 2 months of lockdown apart from all others in the past. People in Kashmir are no longer interested in an interaction with the Indian state. That space is now dead. From those who have been hardliners to separatists demanding a union with Pakistan or Azadi to those siding with India, they've all reacted to the current political situation as a big, abominable trauma. The collective shock, fear, and reprisal has, however, turned them into silent protesters. They say this may well be the lull before the storm or the making of a molten mass that is bound to erupt. Of course, we spoke to a wide spectrum of people, from politicians, of course, those that were not in jail, bureaucrats, homemakers, school teachers, traders, fruit sellers, taxi unions, auto drivers, students, teachers, intellectuals, poets, writers, farmers, children, journalists, civil society workers. We also spoke to Pandits, Sikhs and Christians, and even wedding caterers across 5 districts over 8 days. Okay. From Srinagar to Baramulla to Anantnag to Badgam and even Jammu, all had one thing in common. Every single interaction was an emotional outpouring of betrayal or humiliation. So, as Freny had pointed out earlier, Article 370, despite being hollowed over the decades, over the last 70 decades, is very close, is linked to the dignity of the Kashmiri people. Okay, and they know that despite it being hollowed out by successive governments, they saw this act as a final and complete act of betrayal and humiliation. So as we sat with a large group of journalists at the Srinagar Press Club, this was one of the first things they said. Your dignity, my dignity. 370, 370. Without it, we are disrobed. And the added humiliation was the taking away of statehood. Okay, so it was both the abrogation and the taking away the statehood. And just to tell you, okay, so what people had told us, people had stakes in the system, the Indian state. Generally what happens is that the system is derailed by rebels. Here the irony is that the system has been derailed by the system. Kashmiris have been suffering for generations and fighting a survival war. But what you see now is a parallel resistance, referring to the civil disobedience movement. There are 2 kinds of resistance at work. Opening shops for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, and the silent resistance of not protesting. There is no hope. People have got used to living without hope. People for 60 days don't want to allow themselves to be sold as a symbol of normalcy by opening shops. Nobody will kill them. There is no militant call for strike. No separatist leader has sponsored a strike. It's a voluntary strike. And it's in the same manner from Kazigund to Uri for a 100-kilometer valley stretch. Everyone is voluntarily losing money. Rather than acknowledging people's resolve, rather than appreciating their non-violent attitude, now we are being asked questions as to why we are not continuing with our lives as normal. Okay, why aren't we resuming our everyday lives? Officers are asking why people are not coming out now. Do you want them to come out? Then you want to trigger a law and order situation and kill people. Government of India, governments across the globe should respond to the silence. They have not been responding to the shouts, to the slogans, to the cries, to the screams. But for the first time, they have to respond to the silence, referring to the voluntary shutdown of shops and business establishments, etc. They have to acknowledge and understand the silence. Silence speaks something. You have to listen to it. You have to give words to the silence. Is the shutdown based on fear? It could be a number of things. But one plausible argument which I like is Kashmiris have employed a number of ways to resist, to get themselves hurt. They picked up guns, they picked up stones, they died on the streets, they got picked up innocently, they disappeared in jails. All that is gone now. Nothing came from all of this. Now, whether by compulsion, whether out of fear, but in the first 3 weeks they discovered something in the silence. I believe it's a conscious silence. Don't expect something big will erupt. People have understood that it's a long battle, and now that their existence is being questioned, earlier their political aspirations were being abused, it was being denied to them. Now they are being told in subtle ways that their existence is a problem. An activist who said he had been a part admirer of Modi could not hide his sense of personal betrayal. Now they have pitted us against Hindus. A common Kashmiri will resist this tooth and nail even if it costs him his life. We feel we are being robbed. He said that people who were with the idea of India were its first victims. He said that Prime Minister Modi and the government's actions in reading down Article 370 and demoting Kashmir to a union territory has eventually proved the hardline separatist leader, Syed Ali Shah Gilani, right. He said you could never trust India. Now everybody trusts Gilani by default. There is no other option. There is nothing to be explored anymore. Another political activist said the separatists have finally won. Okay, there's also been a deep sense of betrayal. Okay, so people had asked us, can you live without a phone for even an hour? TV is all saffronized. There is tremendous anger at mainstream Indian television. Okay, the crap they are dishing out to the public. What are the Indians doing to Muslims? How can a secular democracy in India permit mob lynching? When 370 was abrogated, the real face of Indian democracy came out. Article 370 was like a nikhahnama, a sacred contract between Kashmir and India. They did it away in one stroke. My wife wanted to visit her sister who is a cancer patient. She couldn't venture out. Okay, there have been tremendous, very painful stories how people could not access health services, how people they did not know that loved ones had died. Okay, my mother has died, or a family member has died. So I mean, there have been very heart-wrenching stories about all of these things. I know of an incident where a Kashmiri man was dead in a hotel in Delhi for 4 days, and no one in his family in Kashmir knew about it. Okay, they can subjugate us physically, but mentally they can't. ये हिंदुत्व कब तक चलेगा? हमारे बच्चों का फ्यूचर क्या है? How long will this Hindutva last? Where is the future of our children? With one stroke, they've been able to unite the people and the political class of Kashmir against the Indian state. Before August 5th, there was a strong pro-India sentiment despite decades of conflict and all that transpired in the recent past. Today, the mainstream view is that if the Indian state can betray mainstream politicians who kept the idea of India alive in Kashmir despite decades of conflict and militancy, how will they act towards ordinary Kashmiris? See what they have done to Farooq Abdullah, Mehbooba Mufti, and Sajjad Lone. It's not as if they were our best leaders. They also spoke about the corruption in the political class in Kashmir. Okay, but they were all pro-India. There could not be a more patriotic Kashmiri than Farooq Abdullah. He had chanted Bharat Mata Ki Jai at a public event and had to pay a price for it. He was a minister in the NDA government and 3-time chief minister. The 81-year-old leader is now under house arrest. Mehbooba Mufti was in alliance with the BJP a short while ago. Sajjad Lone referred to Modi as his elder brother. All three are under detention. And it was very interesting to see that how, today you have the pro-Pakistan, the mainstream, the separatists all united together. So they were actually showing sympathy for leaders who otherwise would have been political arch rivals. Okay, there is a loss of trust, a feeling of deep betrayal and humiliation. Okay, we used to say Pakistan is not a democracy. There is no secularism there. But today, there is a strong pro-Pakistan sentiment. We would never imagine that there would be mob lynchings in India and no action. Perpetrators were celebrated and we feel secure. The middle ground has gone forever. And we also spoke to a number of women who had this to say. We were speaking to this woman at Rajbagh, and she had basically come to see who are these group of people going around talking to various, shopkeepers and things like that. And this is what she had to say. Dignity and freedoms are more important than food and shelter. You have robbed us of our right to peaceful protest. My daughter who is studying in Standard 9 says that Greta Thunberg can speak and condemn world leaders for not doing enough on climate change. But we are not in a position to express our feelings about what has happened. They have locked us inside, and if we express our views openly, there is a threat of arrest. The entire shutdown that you see is our way of protesting. Another woman said, the people of Hong Kong have the right to protest. China is not a democracy, India is. And yet the people of Kashmir have not been given the right to peacefully protest. We protest via silence. The shutdown will continue for a long, long time. Okay. Another woman said, "Kya hum Hindustani nahi the? Were we not Indians?" she asked rhetorically. "Aaj aisa kadam uthaya jo ek gunda hi utha sakta hai." Today what they have done is what only hoodlums can do. And what will what will daily wage workers do? Not everyone has the ability to stock up on essentials for 6 months, talking about the impact of the shutdown. Okay, we are living in a lapsed time with no communication. We've moved 30 years back. Okay, बच्चों की education बैठ गई. Our children's education has come to a standstill. Children studying in private schools get study materials, but the ones going to public schools are worse off. Okay. Then another spoke about how young people, applying for national exams like the medical entrance test, the NEET. They said that they paid for expensive coaching classes, 1 lakh rupees, and with the total shutdown, all that money has gone down the tube. They cannot attend classes. Despite all of this, she said she is in favor of this total shutdown. In the interest of not succumbing to what she sees is a complete negation of the Kashmiri people by the center. For the sake of changing the long-term politics of Kashmir, this short-term sacrifice is essential. Even if you have to keep up the band for a year or two, We will do so for the sake of changing the state of affairs for the future of our kids. Okay. Now, so this is the story about the civil disobedience, and I think the rest of India has a responsibility to foreground the civil disobedience, this largely non-violent protest, and to bring attention to it. Okay, in our struggles in our actions of solidarity and in our struggles for justice. Because the constant narrative about Kashmir has always been the violent narrative, and we must talk about this. Yes, there are a few incidents of violence, but this is predominantly right now. This civil disobedience, I feel strongly, is something that we need to call attention to. Okay, and the other story about Jammu, it has, I mean, it was not, I did not travel to Jammu, but two of my colleagues, Shabnam Hashmi and Revati Lal, had gone to Jammu. And the larger narrative was that Jammu was quite happy with what had happened. And I just want to read to you excerpts about what the situation was in Jammu when they had gone there, and what they also spoke to a wide spectrum of people and what the different people have to say. So when 370 was struck down, the picture painted across much of the national media was that Jammu was celebrating. However, our initial research suggested that this was completely untrue, or at least a distorted picture. Either way, we decided to spend a day and a half in Jammu to find out. We met students at Jammu University, political leaders, transporters, traders, food sellers, journalists, educationists, students at vocational training centers, and members of the Chamber of Commerce. In all, we met about 50 people, and the big picture emerging from Jammu is one of confusion, disorientation, and in many cases far greater fear than in the Kashmir Valley. People were so scared of giving their opinion even anonymously that about half the people we contacted refused outright to meet us. This itself was telling. Unlike the Kashmir Valley, Jammu was not in a lockdown. There was no civil disobedience. Landline, mobile networks, and Wi-Fi connections were working. The internet was, of course, extremely slow. Files that took 3 minutes to transfer once we were back in Delhi were buffering all night in Jammu. But unlike in Kashmir, here it still existed. Shops were open. You could connect with people by and large. Restaurants were open till 11 p.m. You could get food when you needed. Malls were open. Tourists, of course, were absent. We were the only occupants at our hotel. Okay, and at this time, most of the rooms are booked. This is tourist time. The security forces that were omnipresent in Kashmir were much fewer and far between by the day. After dark, the picture changed and cars stopped and checked regularly. Okay. So, however, with shops open, communication more or less in place, and restaurants and commercial establishments open in business, what possibly could be the trauma, if any, for the people of Jammu? Quite a lot, we discovered. A transporter summed it up for us when he said, post the abrogation of 370, Kashmir has had one eye taken out, Jammu has had both eyes removed. Okay, a contingent of transporters and traders we met could not stop talking about their all-round distress. They told us that transport is a 35,000 crore business in Jammu. Its modus operandi is trucks carry mainly government items from the Food Corporation of India. Those are the big contracts. Okay. However, it's a mafia-ridden and a very precariously run business. A few big contractors have a stronghold on unions and freight rates, and they say one thing but constantly undercut their charges and pay less than the officially agreed upon rates to transporters because they can. A market already squeezed to the maximum had no capacity to absorb further shocks when suddenly the abrogation of 370 hit them. Okay, so some of the traders have this to say, or transporters, if there were 500 vehicles at the railway station every day, They take goods from the trains to nearby towns within a 50-kilometer radius. Earlier, these 500 trucks would have a trip a day, which would get them 800 to 1000 rupees. Post abrogation, that has come down to one trip in 4 days. A transporter explained that's business cut down to a quarter already. Some transporters also said that there is a deepening rift between transporters in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, Kashmiris are saying they will not load goods on trucks coming from Jammu, because Jammu is largely in favor of abrogation and things are near normal, so the Kashmiris don't like it. So there is an unwritten rule now that any vehicle coming from Jammu should not be entertained. The symbiotic trade between Kashmir and Jammu is disrupted post 370, one businessman told us. The voices of this content, were quite extensive. We are in the Dashera season, the wholesale market. The mandi is normally so crowded. There's no place to stand. Now it's desolate, empty. The president of the Commerce and Trade Federation of Jammu did a press conference a month ago asking for the restoration of communication in Kashmir and safe passages for transporters. But no one heard us. This is the apple season in Kashmir. Last year in this season, 7,000 crores worth of business was done. This time, the government is saying they will buy fruit worth 8,600 crores from Srinagar. But the thing is, how will they get the fruit into the mandi when individuals aren't able to go and pluck fruit from their orchards because of the overall climate? Well, in the past, there have been threats from militants. There was also a partial shutdown. This time, the government issued a circular asking Amarnath Yatris to go back, citing securities. It led to a complete this thing. In fact, the Kashmiri people thought that they were going to war. India and Pakistan were going to war with the kind of clampdown, with all the kinds of directives that were being issued just before the abrogation. At not one point in time did they ever suspect that 370 was going to be abrogated. This is a very important thing. This is what the Jammuites have been saying. Under 370, what was left of it after all these years? Protection for domiciles from outsiders being able to buy land. Now the BJP is saying that they will restore that. So why did they revoke it in the first place? The biggest fallout of 370 is in Jammu. The taxi business has failed, the hotel failed, transport failed, tourists failed. We had 25 to 30 tourist buses going every day to Kashmir. Now there is only one that takes tours. Not one bus is going out. Initially, we were happy with the abrogation because we had no idea how it was going to affect us. Then a curfew was imposed. Now there is no clarity about anything. I had to sack most of my workers. The next set of people to commit suicide will be the transporters. Okay? So, and the stories from various from students in Jammu University. They told us that they have resigned themselves to being called second-class citizens. They said they fear for their lives. They are being called terrorists on campus for being Muslim and living in the constant fear of being lynched. We have our local identities, said one student. We are Gujjar, Bakerwal, Pahadi, Dogra. But we are increasingly being termed only as Kashmiris and looked upon us as if we are all terrorists and Pakistan supporters. There is no one amongst us who has not voted or who didn't believe in the Indian democracy. We are firm believers in the Constitution of India. But from August 5th, it seems as if a particular community is being targeted across India. So I'll stop with this and Geeta can take this on.
Actually, shall I stand? I think many of you all are a bit tired. I have very little to, to add to what you have already heard from people who have been there very recently. So I'll just make a few points and then hopefully we could have more of a discussion and questions from all of you. I'm a journalist. I work on free speech issues, and some of us have been engaging with journalists in Kashmir for a fairly long time now. especially because they have been facing a lot of censorship uh, by the state for the last several years. I mean, there have been about 20-25 people who've been killed. The latest, of course, being Shujat Bukhari last year. And there were newspapers that were banned for a brief while, Kashmir Reader and others. Two journalists have been were arrested under the NSA. One of them is still under arrest, Asif Sultan, for doing an article on 1 year after Buranwani and really doing a piece which gave, according to the officials, information which they were not privy to. So basically photographs that the family had shared, photographs of his childhood that the family had shared, which he wrote in an article, a very nice piece about the rise and about the profile piece on Buranwani in Kashmir Narrative, for which he was arrested. He's still under arrest. He's still in custody. There's another journalist called Kamran Yusuf, who is a photojournalist, and he was arrested on charges of being a stone pelter. His accounts have been frozen. He's been arrested under the NSA. Now, these are really, these are just a few instances of the daily kind of censorship that journalists face, because of which many of the stories that they really should be writing and what they should be telling don't get published, they don't get written about. And self-censorship is huge. It's already been there. One of the reasons why we decided to go, I was part of a two-member team, Lakshmi Murthy and I. We work with something called the Free Speech Collective, and we've been engaged, like I said, on these issues, was because and we went exactly about a month after the communication clampdown. So we were really keen on understanding exactly what was happening, what were the stories that were not being told, what kind of information was not coming out. And because of the fact that there were so much of these untold stories, the narrative of the Indian state was gaining so much of credence. Basically, the narrative about everything being normal, the narrative that no blood has been shed, therefore everything is fine, that all is well, the narrative that there is no disruption of any kind of services, that everybody is free and people can move about, and that there is no clampdown on movement of people. So there were several things that the government has been continuously saying, and these needed to be verified on ground. So that was a primary concern when we went. And of course, there are a lot of other concerns. There is a report that we brought out. I'm not going to go into a lot of it in detail because so many of those untold stories that we talked about have already been talked about. There is some amount of information that has come through. There are a few things I just want to say. One is that there is actually no access to verified information. And this is a huge problem, even from journalists, the local journalists who live there, because they say that they're absolutely unable to go and meet people who have experienced any particular anything and to be able to talk to them and get information from them. And once that, they obtain some kind of information about detainees, about torture, about issues about the night raids or something like that, again, cross-checking and verifying this information is almost impossible because the response of the state and the response of the administration in Kashmir is that nothing is happening, that there is no thing. So on ground, there is very little of this kind of actual information, cases history. We happened to be in Kashmir when there was a meeting, a press conference that the administration had in Kashmir on that, I think around the last, about a month afterwards. And some of the journalists said that they wanted to ask questions about the minors who were being detained. And Rohit Kansal, the principal secretary, said, no, we don't have any information. He said, but I'm asking you about these minors, we have this information? No, we don't have any information. So essentially, there is continuous denial of any kind of information that we also have got. So a lot of these fact-finding teams and reports and stuff like that exist, they're there, but there is absolutely no way in which you can hold the state accountable to what it has done. Because there is no way the state can be told that this has been done, because the state keeps denying it. Its classic response is to say, everything is fine, everything is normal, nothing has happened. So in this situation, how do journalists operate? How do journalists say anything? The other thing that I want to also talk about, I mean, we've had a little bit of a discussion about Shopia and about the fruit harvesting. And this actually is a good illustration of what actually happens to, the narrative that keeps being built up. So some of us went to Shopia. We went with local journalists who were writing a piece about the apple growers. This is right now the season when the harvest should have taken place and apples should have already come in. I mean, at this point while we are talking, apples should have come in. But there was absolute, people were, none of the trading areas were totally deserted. The apples were on the ready to be plucked, but absolutely no one was willing to go and do the plucking. Apparently, a lot of the laborers who come to work there are from Bihar and from Bengal, but a lot of them had been told to leave, so many of them didn't come. So everything was shut, everything was shut. And we kept hearing a lot of people saying that they will not pluck apples this time. They will not sell. They refuse to participate in the whole process of trading of apples, which is a multi-crore, it's quite a few crores business of, and I'll come to that a little later. The reason why I'm saying this is because you may have read stories in Indian newspapers about the apple trade. There are a few of them, but what we saw and what is actually written about, there's a huge difference. And a lot of the journalists who do go in to write this sanitize a lot of their reports. And there is no, we haven't done any real study of the way in which this is sanitized. But Indian media, to make it more palatable to the Indian media, there's a lot of sanitizing of news reports that come from journalists and local journalists in Kashmir. Having said that, of course, there is a lot of very good reporting. There's a lot of absolutely excellent reporting, a lot of evocative, lots of very moving accounts of people. I mean, you've already heard from Danish, an excellent account, which I hope it gets published somewhere, but a very moving account of what people experience because of being under occupation. It's still not enough. It's still not enough because we are here now, 100 days away from the abrogation of Article 370 and this absolutely incredible, unprecedented, across the world clampdown on communication. And we've not been able to make any dent at all in the narrative of the state on this. We need to ask ourselves why. We really need to ask ourselves why. We need to ask ourselves why it is possible for some place like this to be able to stop an organized meeting. We need to ask ourselves why there is so much of disruption of music programs or of film screenings or anything. And this is not happening now. It's been happening for several years now. We're seeing it more clearly right now because there are so few of them. But this kind of clampdown is really something we need to break. The other thing I want to say is that Kashmir has fallen off the media map already in most Indian newspapers. It'll pretty much fall off that media map even in the international media, almost completely, except for maybe a few pieces, one or two pieces in the Guardian or in New York Times if they're lucky, in Washington Post or something like that. Once it falls off that map, it ceases to exist for the powerful. And when it ceases to exist, it makes no difference. Already the narrative, the dominant narrative about Kashmir and about the problem of Kashmir, the fight for self-determination, the fight for independence, the fight for freedom, all of that is completely controlled. And you have a population which gives consent to it. So you have a large majority of people in India who give consent to this narrative, this dominant narrative. They don't want to hear anything different. And there's again to sort of move away a little, there was this video clip all of you may have seen of these young people in Bangalore who were fighting about some others who didn't stand up for the national anthem. And one of the big arguments, one of the big points in that argument that happened, and which was televised, which was on, it was videographed by somebody, was that you don't understand, our soldiers are there, our soldiers are at the border, don't you care, don't you understand? So this entire notion of nationalism, nationality, what is going to actually happen, and how does one define all of this, is being questioned right now. And we need to come to terms with it. A lot of us need to understand this. We need to define ourselves accordingly. We have, like, I think one of you mentioned about NRC and about the whole confusion about the Citizenship Amendment Bill which is going to be coming. So we really need to be talking about what is going to be happening to that idea of this subcontinent of India and all the other people who live here. I don't want to go into more than this because we've already talked a lot about the detail, and I'd much prefer if we had more discussion. The last point that I really wanted to make is that coming back to the media in Kashmir, there was a huge sense of betrayal. There was a huge sense of anger. There was a huge sense of a loss of so many things that people did understand in terms of the following out of Article 370 over the years, but knowing that it was a symbolic, it was very symbolic for the people of Kashmir despite the hollowing out of it. But what really, many senior editors kept telling us, and I think they were really voicing a lot of what they also experienced, was the sense of alienation. This huge sense of being cut off, being completely unable to relate anymore to this. And one senior editor had told us, he said, the one thing that we always look towards India for, so it's the one thing that we always look towards India for, were the institutions of India. And that we feel today has completely rejected us. And there's just nothing else that can change that one. I'll stop here because we've already had a long discussion, but we can go into details, but I'd really like it if we can have questions and discussion.
You had said about institution failure, but I see larger civil society failure. How do you look at response from a civil society?
Yeah.
For example, earlier also there are things more not was like this, but so the response from a civil society was much more powerful, or I don't know, but it was more responsible in civil society. I don't see that response. One thing I just wanted to I read that civil disobedience report. What struck me very strongly was the mental trauma.
Yeah.
Could you talk more about
So I'll just very quickly about the civil society failure. Yes, it's absolutely correct. There is a total failure of civil society in being able to respond. Many of us have been, I think, many of us have been confined to, very small spaces, and that spaces have shrunk. And one of the things that I forgot to say really is that the state operates in a very, it's far more intelligent than we would give it credit for. And what happened with Kashmir, I think, is a very good example of how intelligent it has been in managing, a whole lot of potential areas of dissent. one of which is the media, the other is civil society. So the combination of threats, the combination of investigations into people's businesses, into their economic kind of economic freeze over them, the kind of ways in which they have done a lot of surveillance, a lot of checking, and then immediately when none of this works, then there is direct action. So they've been able to do all of that very successfully. So many of us who work with civil society and who believe that we need to fight this are trying to figure out ways of breaking this, of fighting this, one of which is here.
Can I just add also, I think we are now in a very, I wouldn't even call it a nationalist, I would put it in a hyper-nationalist mode, in which this whole notion of nation state is now so hyper that you dare not, I think we don't even use the word Kashmir, we say the K word, we are so, and there is absolutely no willingness to, I think, in my opinion, when I went this time, it was, and I've been visiting since 2010, it was really like they were now confronting me and saying that, okay, now we have reached the stage in which, tell us frankly, where do you stand by your political aspirations, where our political aspirations are. And I think this, in this atmosphere, for us to even engage with the subject or even use the words becomes such a daunting task. And I think that's the thing, this huge thing that has been built around it, where I think even mainstream national civil society, everybody is.
No, that's absolutely correct. You know, in the
cannot-
70s or the
even
80s,
think of
many of us who've been part of various groups in the 70s, in the 80s, used self-determination, and we talked about it. We said that there was Tavleen Singh was You
a
can't
very
talk
liberal
about it now.
journalist in the 90s
Tavleen
and
Singh
has
was
done
different.
excellent. Yes, she's done excellent work. That's the whole revolution. They have acknowledged it. In the 90s, she wrote very good pieces.
She wrote about Kashmir.
Yes, extensively.
I
So
see.
these are the things.
I listened to it
She
carefully.
reported extensively. So, I mean, if you have just to see the kind of slide back, she has done work. She's done
And also, I think
extensively good work.
somewhere there's also this, there's certain identification of what is the problem with our country in general, and this whole kind of we are resolving it kind of a mood. And I think the clarity of people on certain issues also is kind of diminishing. And especially on this issue, you see that people are not really sure, because people, I mean, I think in our report called Imprisoned Resistance, we thought it important to go back to history, and write about it, so that people understand that what actually happened. Then, which helps you to think today is that, as that what is happening, is that correct? How do we, as people who believe in democratic processes, etc., look at it? And is this the kind of people that we want to be as a nation also? I think that also is one of the reasons why.
Which is why I had said right from the beginning, it's very, very, very important, I think, to understand the history. Why a separate flag? Why a separate constitution? Why a separate identity? Why a
Brinelle
sense of...
wants to, and then she's going.
Hi, my name is Latoya. I'm a guest here because of the Indian National Congress, and that's where I think during the clampdown in Kashmir, there were reports from personal friends of mine who live in Kashmir that Jawans were entering their homes under instructions, quite threateningly asking for the passwords in their mobile phones so that they could erase all data of the clampdown in Kashmir. There's an Albanian proverb that the state shoots from the carriage and not from the horse. More worryingly, information is escaping from Kashmir that utilities are being used to wage war on ordinary Kashmiri people, like in the bitter cold. Apparently, there hasn't been any electricity or gas for 6 days. Can you verify that? And what do we do as civil society
It's
to
on
stand up to
Twitter.
the government?
Yeah, I know.
Yes, there's no power for the
There's no
past
power.
4-5 days at least.
There
It's been
Yeah, there's
lines
been a
are down.
snowstorm and
The lines are down.
Yeah, the lines are
anyway, I think the phones that they only postpaid
Postpaid is good.
phones were opened up. Like when they also said there is landlines. What our research showed us was there were only 40 or 44,000 landlines. You know, so when they said there was no completely open landline, that was the number. Now even what they've opened is the postpaid
connections.
connections, and what I think people, a lot of them have is prepaid, and there's no internet still in that sense.
What do you propose that we do now? Because I mean, we can have a talk shop. We can all, acknowledge our impotency.
I
or we
have
can
an
do
idea.
something.
I mean, since I'm sitting in IIT, I want to ask this question of all of you. I don't know how many of you are actually in IT or whatever, but I've been obsessed with this idea of how the state has been able to pull off this communication clampdown. Because I went there before the before postpaid were restored, and like one of them mentioned, I don't know who, that certain lines were available, certain
Essential
mobiles were
services.
available. So there was BSNL, which was giving certain connections, certain numbers which were allowed selectively. The private telecom companies were totally
Airtel opened up in
No.
Gowda.
Even private telecom like
in only
Ericsson and
certain
all,
areas.
some people had
In the
were able
No,
to
they opened up
had
in
their own
Kupwara
numbers.
area. Airtel opened
when
up.
I
even
I'm
in
talking
Bangalore
about
said
I'm talking
that.
about when I went in
Ah.
2000, in just about a month later. Slowly they started opening it up everywhere. They opened it up in Jammu. They opened it up in Kargil for some reason. So there was one journalist who went all the way to Kargil to be able to access the internet and file his story. So there were all these kind of bizarre things, but they did manage to selectively unlock some areas and keep the others locked and keep the others. Landlines, of course, which hardly any of us use, where we really need to think about communication. I'm wondering whether there is something called communication warfare, which David Kay, who's the UN rapporteur for freedom of speech and expression, does not agree with. But I'm really curious to know how we use communication as a means of warfare. And then what does one do in such situations? So how do we find peer-to-peer networks? What do we do? How do we actually build up other ways in which go back to ham radio, go back to what sort of frequencies do we use? We really need to think about that. I'm just putting it out here. You guys can think about it and tell us, please, because we really need to know. This is something that can happen everywhere. It can happen very easily. It's already internet shutdowns are all over the place, and we can all be. We won't even be able to organize this meeting. You had to speak about the public health,
The mental health,
the mental health.
Yeah, so I mean, Kashmir has already, has a very high level of mental health morbidity to do with the prolonged, conflict. I mean, that's typical of any conflict situation in any part. And a 2016 study by MSF, had reported that as much as 45% of Kashmiri population was experiencing symptoms of mental distress, with 41% exhibiting probable depression. Okay, so you anyway have the situation, and the mental health services in Kashmir are also otherwise quite underdeveloped. Okay, there are some districts in which the district mental health program is functioning, but otherwise the overall services. They have one hospital in Srinagar, the Srinagar Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, and we visited there. And we spoke to the consultant over there, and he said that, he did talk about people reporting increased stress and anxiety since the abrogation had taken place. Okay, because people were feeling extremely uncertain about the future. So, but whether all of this translated into mental health morbidity in terms of clinical symptoms, it was too early to state that, but people did report increased levels of stress and anxiety. And another important thing is that the crackdown. So part of this increased levels of stress and anxiety had to also do with the overall crackdown, not able to access any kind of information, not being able to communicate. You had to physically go somewhere to know anything for a long, long time till, perhaps the landline, the mobiles, the postpaid mobile connections were restored. And also people could not, there was also, public transport was not functional. So people could not even access services for regular mental health needs, and if they were feeling stress or anxiety at this point in time. And he said that prior to 5th August, an average of 200 patients would visit the OPD, which actually came down to something as 70 to 80. And that he said 70 to 80 was because it was a Monday. Normally, that's typically after a holiday, you see an increased patient load in any hospital. And then Srinagar also had more restrictions on movement than other areas, which had also led to the fall, so making it really difficult for people to access services. This is a tertiary care hospital. Okay. Now, he says that the conflict, he says, especially in the last 2 months, have created structural reasons for depression, anxiety, and a whole host of mental health problems. He says that the economy of Kashmir, so besides the communication clampdown, the blockade, the security clampdown, he says that the economy of Kashmir is predominantly dependent on agriculture and other related activities. Almost 90% of the workforce is linked to the apple economy in some way or the other. So while with the latter taking a big hit on account of the blockade and threats from certain corners, apple orchardists are deeply worried about how they would sell their produce, and all those linked to the orchard industry are also deeply impacted economically, and that would also be a cause of stress. Okay, and then he also spoke about the inability to communicate and the threat of communication are added factors of this stress. So not able to communicate, and if you say anything, he says the situation has reached that today, even as a doctor-patient, in the doctor-patient relationship, if a patient comes to you, he or she is not willing to talk about the larger political situation, that there is that level of suspicion. And he says earlier people used to call before going somewhere, but now they have to go personally, which I said. Okay, and this becomes especially difficult during medical and other emergencies and the death of a loved one or a family member. Then people are essentially afraid to speak because of fear and mistrust. People are afraid that if they air their views on the political situation, they will be put behind bars. There is a high vigilance with regards to communication. Okay? Yeah.